Amit Ranjan, thank you very much for coming on our podcast today. You have an impressive background that I look forward to discussing with you. But before we begin, could you please introduce yourself to your audience? Who are you? What are you doing? How should we identify you?
Thanks, David, for having me on this podcast. Look forward to interacting with your community. So, quick background about myself. So, I am a technology entrepreneur, and in 2006, I happened to co-found a company called SlideShare, which was in the online professional content space. And 2006, as you might imagine, was a very different era compared to where we are in 2023. It was a very early stage of the social web. This was a time when YouTube had just been created, and Flickr and MySpace were still around, and they were the most popular network. So SlideShare happened during that era, that phase. And I was one of the three co-founders. Two of my other co-founders were based in the Bay Area. I was based out of New Delhi. And SlideShare, grew fast, became very popular, became the predominant professional content sharing platform on the internet. 2012, we were acquired by LinkedIn. I spent a couple of years at LinkedIn SlideShare post the acquisition. In 2014, I exited, early 2015 actually, and in a bit of a bolt from the blue, it wasn't necessarily something I had planned, but I ended up working for the government of India, completely, different space, a diametrically opposite, kind of a continuum as far as the professional spectrum goes. And more specifically with the government, what happened was the Indian government had, sometime around 2008 or 9, they had put together the digital identity program called Aadhaar. And that had been in the works for about 5 or 6 years. And by 2015, when I was kind of, contemplating what to do next, the government had by then decided that, they wanted to build other digital platforms that used Aadhaar's API capabilities, and they were looking for, people with a technology background, people who had built large, scalable platforms, and who came with an entrepreneurial mindset. And it was during that phase that I was working very closely with Sharad and his organization called iSpirit. We are all, as I said, extended volunteers at iSpirit. iSpirit is a completely voluntary body. And through that association, I ended up, I landed up in the government. I took up a formal position as an architect at the Ministry of Electronics and IT, which is the federal nodal agency or the ministry or the department that deals with everything to do with information technology in India. And they were building a series of platforms. And the platform that I extensively worked on is something called DigiLocker. So DigiLocker is, think of it as a federated document network. There's various documents and IDs and, data records that any government issues to its citizens over their lifetime. So similarly in India, an Indian citizen would have been issued a whole host of, documents, records, certificates, IDs. So, and the entire, exchange economy or the ecosystem around that happens in the physical world. People are taking, paper copies and sharing them. And the idea was that, can you create a digital equivalent of that? Can you digitize the document and the data records, and then build a complete, transaction ecosystem whereby if you are kind of stopped by a cop on the road and he's asking for your driving license, you actually don't give him a paper DL, you actually pull out a digital record from your mobile phone, or if you're, let's say, catching a flight or a train, then you can actually show a digital version of your, IDs. So this started off in 2015. As you might imagine, for a country like India with 1.4 billion people, it is easier said than done. This is a mammoth, gigantic project, and it took, I would say, almost 2 to 3 years for us to even get started, to put together the basic concept, the architecture, the APIs. We put together an online application. And by about 2018 or 19 is when this platform actually started taking off. So we are in 2023, so it's been about 6 or 7 years. And the platform is, kind of still it is used by about more than 200 million people. So that's a big number in itself, but it's, at an India scale, that's still less than 25% of the country's population. So a long way to go there.
Impressive. Thank you for sharing that with me. So, a lot to unpack there. I'd like to go back to talk about the evolution of SlideShare. But before I do, I have to ask you, you mentioned almost with a chuckle, going from a startup environment into the government. How would you categorize India's government in startup terms? Was it an easy transition? Is the Indian government fairly agile and able to absorb some of this thought leadership that you have in the tech space?
Yeah, so governments are honestly different creatures. They're just designed and built differently than what you have either in the private sector or in the more extreme version of the private sector, the startup space. But at the same time, the government is kind of, I would say they are honest, and they kind of, reflect inwards and kind of look at their own capabilities, and they've been able to identify where the gaps are. Now, the way governments are set up, it may not be easy for them to fill those gaps, immediately, or just have overnight solutions for that. So I think what has happened in India, and something which is quite remarkable, and I feel very thankful for having had the opportunity to work with the government, is that the government of the day, about around 2008-9, kind of figured out that there are these gaps. And, there's various initiatives, there are various things that the government wants to do. And what better way to kind of, fill those gaps, but to kind of, somehow engineer or orchestrate a situation wherein people from the private sector, people from the startup world, people who are working in, big IT services companies, they somehow come into the government, become a part of it in various, engagement modes. And then they kind of, think of it as a public-private partnership. So it's the government and its own infrastructure and bureaucracy, and there's people from the outside who are coming in, and they kind of come together. And it's a loosely enmeshed system. It's not a monolithic, tight system. But because this is for the cause of because this is for the national cause, it is for the country at large. I think everybody puts in their best effort, and this entire, I would say, configuration has had tremendous success in India. The governments have really kind of created a path or orchestrated a complete mechanism whereby people from the private side are coming and working in various capacities with the government, and they are contributing. And so I would say that in that sense, I always tell, anybody I talk to is that I ended up working in the government, but think of it like a startup within the government. In many ways, it is like a government startup. If I were to kind of, quote unquote, take it with a pinch of salt, not exactly the startup in the Silicon Valley sense, but imagine what a startup inside a government would look like. And that's what I ended up kind of, working on. And I would say it's very creditable that governments can and have responded in this manner. And they've kind of, orchestrated a situation whereby the private side and the public side come together to build these large digital platforms.
That's great to hear. I heard from Sharad in a previous interview that the Indian government can take a while, like perhaps any government, it can take a while to come to consensus, but that once it does, it's usually fair and reliable. So that was heartening to hear. But with the rapid pace of technological progress, it seems like you need to be more agile. And that's interesting to hear that now they have kind of a startup approach within the government. I think that's probably the best next step. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think also what has happened is that because India has such a large footprint on the IT side, so there is a lot of innate capability. There are people definitely on the IT services side where, these big companies are working for global partners. Also, I would say on the product side, it's kind of, happening now. And there is obviously the desire in every citizen to see the best for their country. So in a way, this was bound to happen, is that when you have such a large native indigenous domestic industry, which is kind of building software for the world, at some point in time, that industry is going to reflect inwards and say, what can we do for the country? And the government of the day kind of put together this mechanism. So I think India is fortunate in that sense, is that we do have a very large pool of software engineers, probably the second largest after the US, and that has actually come together with the government to make this happen.
Great. So going back to SlideShare, how would you describe the evolution from starting it with two other co-founders to being acquired by LinkedIn? How much did it grow in that time?
So it grew massively. I mean, it started as a small website that, and let me kind of quickly share with you the context in which SlideShare was created or born, and I think that will add some meaning to this answer. That in 2006 we were actually attending a conference here in New Delhi as attendees. It was organized in one of the technology events here. And what happened was that we were also actually part of the organizing team, and we realized that at the end of the event, there was no effective way of sharing of presentations files of the speakers that they had, the sessions that had happened through the day. And because we were the organizers, so we found people coming to us and saying, "Hey, can you help us share?" And we had these speakers come to us and say, "Can you help my presentation notes or presentations get distributed amongst the audience?" And conversely, on the audience side, there were people coming and telling us, "Can you give me that guy's speaker? That speaker, he was very good." So we found ourselves kind of buffeted between those two group of people. And there was no means of sharing presentation files at that time, in 2006, actually. And at the same time, we saw that there was no problem with sharing of video files or sharing of, pictures or images that people were clicking with their mobile phones, because Flickr was quite popular. YouTube had been born about 8 or 9 months back. And so people were catching on to that concept. So that was a trigger in our mind, is that it seems like, there is no effective or easy way to share presentations, documents on the internet today. And in many ways, the way we kind of describe that problem is that this event ended today, but these files, these presentation, these PPT files that, kind of capture a lot of the value of what this event delivered. A lot of the archival value of what was talked about today kind of, is captured in these files, and they are going to die on people's hard drives and people's desktop folders today, because there is no effective way to free them on the internet. And the idea was that, okay, and we looked at, as I said, YouTube and Flickr, and we said, wow, this is so great. These videos and these pictures seem to kind of have a social life on the internet. So we kind of thought in those lines. We said, is there a mechanism, or is there a way to kind of, create a platform or think of a platform whereby these documents, these files are kind of, let loose on the internet, and they start their life on the internet today. They don't go to die in people's hard drives and their desktop. So that was the trigger. And it started from a zero base. We looked around, we found there was no other means of achieving that. So we kind of said, okay, let us just build a prototype ourselves. So we put together a team, we built a prototype, we launched it, and it immediately took off. And we realized that, we had really hit a nerve here, because this was a latent need. This was an unexpressed need. Nobody was telling us that, you go and build this thing. But just the fact that the way it kind of, took off was clear indication that, there is more to this. So it kind of started growing very fast. And by the time, we got acquired in 2006, it was about 7 or 8 years. So SlideShare had almost 150 million users at that time. And it was the predominant or the most popular content sharing platform on the internet. And and we had a lot of technology partnerships with other big tech companies, including LinkedIn. And that it was one of those partnerships that kind of, finally led us to getting acquired by LinkedIn.
That's great. When you say 150 million users, is that globally? What was the distribution of that? Was it predominantly within India? I'm curious, how popular was this around the globe?
Well, this was totally a global platform. For most global social media platforms, I mean, the broad breakup that you would see is that about 20 to 25% would be, North American, usage. So this is the US and Canada and those countries. Around 20 to 25% would be, from Europe. There'll be another like maybe 30% from South America, Africa, and the rest of it from Asia. So SlideShare kind of mirrored this trend. And as I said, this trend would largely be, replicated across most global social platforms.
Proper distribution. Well done. Starting with a small team and then scaling to a massive team. How was that? Was that a smooth transition? Were there some growing pains on the way? And if so, how did you identify and address them?
So startup journeys are never smooth. I mean, they're never a straight line. They always kind of, go like this. And I always tell, friends that startups are embodiments of, living chaos. It's like, it's never a smooth journey. It's never a straight line. And but the good thing is that you learn along that journey. So the key thing to understand is that people who thrive at startups are probably people who are good at teaching themselves. They're good at self-learning. They're good at learning quickly. So quick learning and self-learning are two traits that, in my opinion, really come to your rescue. They would really help you if you're kind of doing a startup or even working at a startup, because a lot of the situations that you're going to face, whether it is, the idea, the product, the execution of that product and idea, then, coming on to the business side, how do you put together a sales team? How do you put together a marketing team? How do you take it to the market? How do you sell it to customers? And then the whole, thing about running a company, because company is made of human beings. It's about people. And a lot of, people who are coming with a technology background, people who are software engineers, they might be good at writing code. They're not necessarily good at managing human relationships. That's not something that they were kind of, trained for. So I would say that often turns out to be, quite tricky. That's an area where you see a lot of, churn. You'll see a bunch of chaos, startup teams, grow fast. There's a fair bit of, ups and downs. And, but essentially, you have to teach yourself. You do have one advantage in the sense that, social media is kind of an ecosystem where people talk about their experiences. So if you've built a company, if you've scaled an organization, if you've taken it to, let's say, an IPO, and you go and search on Google, you'll find so many people who have shared their stories in a completely non-commercial, original, authentic way. So when you read about that kind of, tells you, it gives you pointers, it gives you cues. So there's a lot of, learning that happens just by reading how others have, undertaken that journey before you. So that is, in my opinion, a big tool, and something that comes to your rescue time and again, is that just talking to others, reading about others' experience, reaching out. And the startup ecosystem is fairly well networked, is that, and especially if you're, working on open source, and you can argue that, SlideShare was an open source version of content. We were trying to create an open source version of a content community. So the whole idea of open source is based on the notion of paying it forward, is that, you stand on the shoulders of what others have done. You build something. And then once you get to a certain level of success, you can't, unfortunately, pay the people who you have kind of, whose work you have leveraged on. But the way to kind of, pay back, the way to this ecosystem grows is that you pay it forward. You kind of, help out others. You kind of, let others who are in a similar situation, you kind of, help them out in whatever way they can. So that is something which is really, very powerful about the startup ecosystem.
An analogy that comes to mind hearing you talk about that is working in a startup is like swimming in the ocean looking for resources, whereas working for a company is like being on a boat.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it is accurate. It is accurate in that sense. In large organizations, they are designed in a different way. If there's a certain amount of work that is required, by definition, the organization would, maybe hire 2x or 3x the resources that are required because they are planning for things like redundancy, continuity, succession planning. Now, those words don't exist in the lexicon of a startup in the initial years, at least. And you'll have so many stories about startups where they'll never have thought of this for the first 10 years or first 8 years of their organization's journey. It's only when they reach that stage and they have to scale and they have to grow, that's when they realize, oh yeah, you know what, it's not, I mean, while there are differences between startups and large companies, but in a sense, a startup, once it grows, does mirror many of the dynamics and the challenges that you see in large organizations as well. So there is that transition as well. And it's said that, one of the sayings I remember is that, what made you successful in the past isn't what will make you succeed in the future. Is that the solutions of yesterday really, you have to, while you leverage them, you learn and you kind of grow fast, but they are not going to help you tomorrow. You got to kind of, get onto a different trajectory tomorrow. So, which means that it kind of explains this constant churn and this chaos, and this chaos kind of gets reflected even in the the kind of teams startups have, in the team composition, team numbers. It's very common to hear of a startup team and say, what, I mean, more than half of my team wasn't there 15 months ago. So the company is getting constantly reborn and rejuvenated, and the challenge for the founding and the management team is that how do you keep the ship sailing through all this tumultuous journeys.
Looking back, I'm sure you had 1,000 lessons that you learned from building your startup. Are there any that stick out in your mind that you still remember, like a lesson learned in building up SlideShare?
Oh, I think lots of lessons. I think, we did many things right, but we did many things wrong as well. I mean, to be honest, looking back in hindsight, there are many situations where you kind of reflect back and say, we wish we had the benefit of hindsight and we would have done this in such a different way. I would say that, a few quick lessons that come to my mind, especially from the startup ecosystem, is that, when you're building a business, especially, and I would kind of confine myself that a lot of my expertise is best applied to software, internet-based ideas. It may not necessarily kind of, port over or carry over to physical kind of businesses. So I'm kind of, I would like to kind of narrowly focus on that space, is that you really need to kind of focus on product and user experience. Right? If Steve Jobs is an iconic figure who taught so many of these life lessons to Silicon Valley, and one of the things that you really learn from him is the focus on the customer. That you have to focus on the customer, and the fact that often the customer doesn't know what he or she wants. So it's not as if just by inquiring the customer or by asking them questions, which is what you would hear about in traditional market research. So a lot of the answers, you may not get by directly asking people. You have to kind of have the pulse of the market. You have to read what the users are wanting or they are needing in a latent way, and then figure out what the solution to that would be. So focus on, I would say, the product. Focus of user experience is paramount on the internet. I would say the importance of having on the side of building a company, the importance of having a strong founding team, a strong management team, is something that you realize is a very important factor. You need multiple team members or multiple founders, preferably, each of whom have maybe complementary skill sets. If somebody is good at, let's say, technology, the other person could be a business-oriented person. The third person could be a people's-oriented person who's good at managing a company's internal matters. So you need a multifaceted team, and without a team of that sort, it's very hard to build a sustainable organization that will grow over a long period of time. And finally, I would say that this constant chaos and this constant churn and this constant non-linearity that you see in the startup journey, being able to master that, being able to manage that, because human beings by definition are designed to kind of gravitate towards certainty. We want a grand design. We want to see that design, and we want to kind of move towards it, or kind of make our way towards it in a predefined way. But unfortunately, the startup journey is just built up in a different way. So managing that transition, understanding those changes, and being able to manage that at your own interpersonal level, managing it in the team around you, that is of paramount importance.
What happened when LinkedIn acquired SlideShare? Did the culture change? Did the team change? Did the processes change? Could you talk about that transition?
Yeah, they did change. And to be honest, life inside a large organization, a public company, is never the same as what it would be inside a 100-member startup. So I think there were many changes, I think, with respect to how the team was structured. Because, once you are acquired, and this is very common of Silicon Valley, you don't completely control the, what's going to happen to the product or the or the service, because it's now part of a larger game plan, and it has to now fit into that game plan. And, you have to kind of, learn to coexist within that imperative. So there were lots of changes, as is the case with every acquisition story. Changes in the teams, changes in how the teams are run, managed. The culture definitely undergoes a change. At the same time, it must be said that there is pressure on Silicon Valley big tech companies also to, kind of have a little bit of a startup culture, because the equation on their side is that as companies grow bigger and they become larger, it's not easy for them to keep on innovating. So they look at startups as one of the sources of this innovation. So there is that I would say that pressure on them as well. And they try to kind of, once they acquire companies, and they try to kind of, draw some kind of a balance between what the earlier culture and the existing culture in the larger company is. So, but yeah, it's a gradual process. Over a period of time, it peters out. And I would say SlideShare was no different in that sense. It took a few years, and then it was kind of, part of LinkedIn.
Did you have an internal celebration once you got acquired by LinkedIn? That's quite some validation.
It's kind of a bittersweet moment, honestly. And in our case, honestly, we had never planned for the exit. It was just I would say, a configuration of circumstances that led to it, which is very different in many other startup stories. You'll often hear when you talk to startup founders that they always had the exit on their radars, and they either, kind of orchestrated it, or they, were trying to gravitate towards it, in some way or the other. The SlideShare story was very different. Honestly, we had absolutely no plans of selling. It just so happened that, LinkedIn was a big company, and they came along and they said that, we think we could coexist together. And, it was true that the SlideShare community was kind of a subset of the LinkedIn community. So there was synergy at a community level. Plus also the fact that one of the drivers for us was the realization that so we were a small company with offices in the Bay Area and in Delhi, and we were having a little bit of a hard time, managing the show across 2 different continents, 2 different time zones, 2 different, organization cultures. So the thinking was that if you become a part of a larger ship, they'll actually help you run the company. So that to us was one of the big motivations why we agreed to the acquisition. But as I said, acquisitions are always bittersweet. There's some things that you really like. There's some things you kind of feel it was set up in a different way, but that's just the reality of it.
Did that transition help you at all with moving into the government?
I would say that in general, not having very strong expectancies, being flexible, being agile, being oriented towards quick learning and self-learning, those are some of the traits that that I really kind of imbibed and learned during the startup phase. And those generic traits, I would say, did come in helpful when I joined the government. And because, I realized that the government is obviously a very different beast compared to, technology startups, especially Silicon Valley type technology startups. But I think, at the end of the day, my thinking was when this offer from the government came the first time, it was the opportunity to serve the national cause, which was something much bigger than what you would do in a startup. And B, I kind of broken down into thinking about the end user. Who is the end user in case of a technology product, and who is the end user in case of something that the government is building? So the government is focused on citizens, whereas products in the technology world think of users or customers. But some of the key drivers for why humans want to adopt a particular piece of a product or a technology, I felt weren't very different between a startup or a government. So I looked for some of those similarities, that how is it that while I become a part of the government, how can I be flexible? How can I come in with a lower expectancy, but be very action oriented, be very agile? Governments are known to be bureaucratic, right? And that's true for, the world over. It's not just the Indian government. Governments are built by design as silos. One part of the government doesn't know and doesn't talk to the other part. So how is it that, some of the learnings from the startup journey can actually help bridge, some of those requirements? I think I was able to manage that transition because I kept myself, flexible and agile and willing to learn and roll up my sleeves and, not get caught up in any preconceived notions.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Going back to that initial merger acquisition with LinkedIn, you played an integral role in that. Could you describe how you approached that? Like what exactly did you do?
So we had 3 founders at SlideShare, as I mentioned previously. And, my role was twofold. I mean, I used to run the India office. So anything and everything that happened in India was my domain, and I used to be responsible for it. But more importantly, on the product side, a lot of the product management function, and it kind of, starts in startups with a small team, but as the product grows, it kind of grows in scale and complexity. So I was kind of heading product at a broader level, and which means that, having a product roadmap, figuring out what you got to build tomorrow, what you got to build in 3 months, what you got to build in 12 months, and so on and so forth. And then, having teams which are capable, which are trained, which kind of, have the wherewithal to actually deliver on that product roadmap. So a lot of that, that part or that responsibility at SlideShare was kind of entrusted to me. And obviously once the acquisition happened with LinkedIn, then, our plans were kind of, they had to dovetail into the LinkedIn overall roadmap. So I would say that, that was a big transition moment for our teams and for me also in particular.
So moving on to DigiLocker, where is it now? How do you feel about the project?
So DigiLocker in 2023, we started in 2015. So it's been about almost 7.5, 8 years. And the platform is used by, close to 200 million plus citizens of India. India being 1.4 billion, there's still a long way to go. But the way I would describe, this question, or the way I would answer this question is that, in my opinion, a project of this nature is going to take a fair bit of time to actually to not just get created, but for real adoption is going to take some time. So what we have now is version 1 of DigiLocker. It's up there, it's successful, it's running, it's used by a large number of people. Now the government has also realized the real power behind the platform, and they're putting their complete weight behind it. They are pushing it, they are driving it in different directions. There's more and more areas where DigiLockers, being asked to deliver, or it's being, relied upon. And it's also, as you might imagine, that many of the India stack layers, they kind of, make most sense when you look at them in conjunction with one another, while they are standalone platforms. But the real power behind India stack can be actualized once you have those layers working in conjunction. So there's the payment layer, there's the data layer, there's the authentication layers, and so on and so forth. So once you kind of look at all these layers in conjunction together, that's when you'll be able to realize the real power of what the stack can deliver. And thereby, DigiLocker plays a very valuable role because it is used extensively in conjunction with the digital identity system Aadhaar. So think Aadhaar, DigiLocker, UPI, and many of the digital products and services that are getting built by startups in India would be utilizing all of these platforms and all of these as part of their technology stack.
I see. With India's stack, that sounds kind of specific to India. How easily would it be to export that into different markets?
Yeah, this is a move that is already underway, honestly, because now that India has successfully conceptualized, designed, architected, built, and scaled the stack, my understanding is that a lot of countries around the world which have applauded India and asked them that, if there is a way that they could benefit from the experience of building this. And the Indian government rightly is kind of, setting up the mechanisms for how this information, this knowledge, sometimes this could be, source code, or this could be APIs, or the design and the architecture of these APIs. There has to be a real mechanism for sharing that. And to a specific question, I'd say that, every country would need to kind of, look at where things are, and then build their own version of the stack, right? In India, the stack started with the digital identity system. That was the base foundational layer. And then, you had the data layer. That's where DigiLocker came in. And then you had the payments layer, and then you had the consent layer, where a lot of the fintech applications are coming in. This was the path that India followed. It is possible that, other countries might have a slightly different setup, and they'll probably still need to start off with some kind of a foundational digital identity system. But beyond that, they could take a slightly different trajectory. It's not necessary that they'll follow exactly the way it's gone about in India.
You spent a lot of time in the US. It seems like the US and India are intrinsically linked, particularly with technology. How would you describe the cultures, the environments between these two, relatively speaking, massive countries?
I think there's tremendous collaboration, partnerships that are happening between the US and India, especially in the IT and the technology space. There's a big Indian community in the US, and especially in Silicon Valley. So many of the top big tech CEOs are people of Indian origin. And now there's also a growing trend of a lot of people who've actually gained very valuable experience in the US, wanting to come back and work in India. So I would say, this constant back and forth. There's people from India who are moving to the US. There's people from US coming back to India. Most American corporations would have some kind of a development set up in India. Many of them have what we call in India GDCs. These are global developmental centers. it's very common to hear of big, large organizations like Microsoft and Cisco and IBM's and Google, where they'll have the headquarters somewhere in the US, and their biggest office outside of their headquarters would be somewhere in India. It's you can, I'm sure if you Google, you'll find many stories around this. So all this kind of is contributing to a situation where there's constant back and forth, constant partnerships, flow of people. There's obvious money flows, capital flows as well. A lot of the venture capital money that comes into India comes as a US origin. And many Indian companies also, if they are looking at a global market, they choose to incorporate somewhere in the US. So there is very deep linkages both ways, especially when it comes to technology and software and internet.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your perspective on that. You're also very important, it would seem, in the Indian startup scene, both through your volunteer work with iSpirit, but then also you've set up communities and mentorship. Could you talk at all about the role that you play in the Indian startup scene, what that looks like, and why you do it?
So my, community involvement in the Indian startup scene actually goes back to almost 2003 or 2004, which is when I, entered this domain. I had a different career prior to that. And a lot of it was kind of initially, I was just learning the tricks of the trade. I was just doing things, just trying to to learn for my own sake, and also maybe help others out in a shared mode, because the social web was all about shared learning, kind of shared experiential learning. So I think that was one of the things that really used to drive me, and it motivated me. And I think around that time, we put together a technology-oriented community in India, which went by the name Bar Camp. And Bar Camp used to organize these mini communities in various cities. And I happened to play a very early pivotal role in doing that in India. And a lot of my initial contacts and my networks in India, honestly, got built because of those initiatives and not because of SlideShare. So when SlideShare happened, it kind of my involvement took a slightly different role, which was the cause of product entrepreneurship out of India. Because India, if you, I'm sure you'll be aware that while India has a big footprint in the technology space, it's the area where it's made the most impact is IT services. It's in outsourcing. It's where in helping other clients do their, build their platforms and build their technology systems. It has had, lesser success when it comes to products that are built out of India for the global markets. So what we were doing at SlideShare was actually, it fell into the latter category. This was a global product which was being built by founders of Indian origin, and both in Delhi and in the Bay Area. So it was kind of, it had a mixed parentage. I wouldn't say it was completely an Indian product. Honestly, that would not be the right way to portray it. But it was kind of, it had a mixed parentage. The founders were kind of, Indian and American, and the teams were both in both situations, but the product itself was global. So when I was building SlideShare, a lot of people in India used to actually look up to me for, how I could kind of, help them. And my association with Sharad's organization, like iSpirit, kind of essentially emanated from that experience, that they were also interested in the story of how SlideShare as a product was being built in a country like India. So over a period of time, it kind of gravitated towards more of playing the role of of driving product entrepreneurship. And eventually, finally, it led to the government, because while we were thinking products at that time, we were not thinking government products. But later on, when I exited SlideShare, what happened was that we realized that building government digital platform also falls within the ambit of building products for your country. It may not have been the particular flavor of products that we started off thinking. We were not necessarily thinking about government products, honestly. But once you kind of, take a sweep around the horizon and say, yeah, why not? I mean, the country needs to, build these large digital systems to go to the next level. And some of the learnings around building these big platforms, they are the same, whether you are building it for a startup, whether you're building it for a large company or a building for a government. So finally, that's where I landed, is that think product, but inside the government systems. So it's kind of, to your question, I would say my the role that I've played in the Indian startup community has kind of evolved or morphed along that journey. Started off with more grassroots level, just being helpful to others, moving on to something which was more product oriented, products built out of India for global markets. And finally, with the government stint, it kind of took us again a little bit of a turn wherein it kind of gravitated towards, think products, but inside government systems. And these have massive, a national footprints. If the government could actually successfully build a large platform, then its multiplier effect is manyfold. So that's the way I would describe, the role, my role that is that I've played in the ecosystem, and how it's changed over the years.
A fifth of a century, 20 years you've been in this space. That's incredible. And you mentioned, India was known as an IT services country for a while, and now it's moving into a product nation, I believe, as Sharma put it. And what do you think needs to happen? Like, how is that transition? Is it moving faster than expected? Are there some hurdles to overcome? Could you talk at all about that transition into a product nation?
Correct. So I think it's a goal and the vision for India to emerge as a product nation. That is what iSpirit, that organization that Sharad heads, is kind of, that's the big role that they are trying to play and orchestrate in the country. And you can clearly see progress, and the winds of change are blowing, the way I would put it, is that there's a very big, ecosystem that's come about within the country as far as digital services, digital products go. A lot of products that are being used in India, built for India, meant for India, are being developed now in India, and often by Indian entrepreneurs and Indian companies. I think on that front, I would say the ecosystem is absolutely kicking, and it has made tremendous progress. There is now a trend also of Indian companies building for the global markets, is happening in a few areas. For example, software as a service for enterprise software, for softwares that are built for SMEs and mid-market companies and enterprises. It's started to happen for that part of the ecosystem. It's probably still not happening on the consumer side. So you're not having a lot of consumer startups or consumer products being built out of India for the global market. And to my mind, that is the holy grail. That is the highest form of, product innovation, because consumer products tend to kind of take a slightly different DNA and a slightly different kind of a trajectory compared to enterprise class products. So hopefully we'll eventually kind of, move towards that as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'd like to finish by talking about your role as an angel investor. You've been an angel investor in various early stage startups, and you're also an advisor to AngelList India. Could you talk at all about your role in angel investing? How did you get into it, and what has been your experience so far?
So honestly, I've been a bit of a late starter to angel investing. I did not angel invest at all while I was running SlideShare or even post acquisition. So the first time I did this was once I had moved out of LinkedIn and SlideShare. That was about 2014 or 15. And that's when I had the money and I had a bit of a time. I also had the experience and the expertise to kind of, to leverage. So that was a time when I actually started this journey. Although I also ended up working immediately for the government, and as you might imagine, that once you're part of the government system, then they might have questions or concerns around conflict of interest. So I had to be cognizant of those requirements, and so any angel investments that I was making, it had to be communicated and told to the government in an active disclosure kind of a mechanism. And then I would say I'm still learning angel investing. I wouldn't say that this is something where I've gained a lot of expertise, but it's great investing in other companies and living their journeys, because honestly the world around us is so diverse. And I have a few experiences, there's a few things that I've worked on, but if you look at the vast expanse of the world around us, that constitute what I know is probably not even 10% of the ecosystem, what the ecosystem has to offer. So, and as somebody who is inherently curious, you really want to learn from others. You want to see what is happening in other parts of the ecosystem, which are different from where you are coming from. So I think, to me, angel investing is, of course, it's an investment. So there's a expectancy of a commercial interest or a commercial return out of it. But in many cases, you're not doing it only for the commercial return. You're also doing it because you see it as a means of helping others, learning from others. So I kind of divide my angel investments into three buckets actually. The biggest bucket and the largest chunk of it is where you are doing it because you want a commercial economic return out of it. The second bucket is where you're doing it because you want to be helpful to others. There's many a times where people who've helped you in the past, or people who have worked for you, they are starting up and they come to you and you really want to be kind of helpful to others. So you're just trying to be a good Samaritan is the way I would put it. And the third bucket where I would do angel investing is where you're just learning. So imagine somebody like me with the kind of background, the kind of experiences I've had, but maybe I wouldn't just have much of an idea about emerging areas like drone technology or the latest biotechnology advances, or what's happening in space exploration. But as the curious person that I am, I see angel investing as a way of interacting with founders who are building for that space and learning from their experiences. So I am personally not. And as I said, I don't consider myself an expert. I'm still learning the tricks of the trade, and it is exciting.
I'm sure it is. It certainly sounds exciting. Listening to you describe those three buckets, I was trying to guess which one is your favorite, and I expect it goes between the helping others and learning yourselves. But I'd like to hear from you. How would you rate your children from return on investment versus learning something new versus helping others?
So I would say, as I said, I didn't start a long time back. So this is still work in progress, probably a little early to kind of comment on the overall portfolio. I do have some good successes, but as I said, I'm also, I've been an operator myself, right? So in that sense, I do think the second and the third bucket are important to me. I think there's people who have helped me in my journey, and I should kind of pay it forward. And angel investing in some of those founders is one way of doing it. And lastly, as I said, just learning from others is that it's almost like in India we use this word called Guru Dakshina. It's a word in Hindi. Guru Dakshina means that you pay something to your guru, you pay something to your teacher, because you are learning from the teacher, and the payment could be in various forms. It need not only be in monetary forms. So the third bucket, to my mind, is something like Guru Dakshina. Is that because I'm at a certain stage of life, I probably don't have the time, I don't have the energy, or don't have the wherewithal to learn about new areas. So here, let me pay a little bit of this Guru Dakshina, and to me, that's a way of kind of learning about completely new areas. And so I wouldn't necessarily measure that bucket purely on the economic returns that bucket generates.
You're involved in many things. You're a man of broad interests and significant accomplishments. vast learning. What are you most excited about looking forward?
I think, one of the mega trends that you obviously see around is digitization pretty much everywhere. I mean, as part of my SlideShare journey, I, saw how the internet and digitization kind of slowly started pervading different walks of our lives. And then, when I happened to work in the government, that same, trend started showing up inside the government, where government systems, government mechanisms, government services kind of are undergoing metamorphosis. They are being reimagined bottoms up. Something that was happening in the physical world using systems and processes that was designed maybe 50 years ago is now being reimagined. So to me, the biggest trend that I see around is this is digitization, and it is bringing about very meaningful, impactful change in our lives. And on the public side, on the government side, it is a way for governments to reinvent themselves as well, especially in developing countries like India, where there could be legacy systems, there could be large leakages, there's a large informal sector. So the role that digitization plays is that it kind of gives you an opportunity to leapfrog some of the inherent deficiencies in the system. So you kind of have a real chance at really galloping through and just leapfrogging one or two phases in between, and just kind of jumping to something which is maybe a couple of orbits upwards. So that is an exciting transition to watch all around me, whether in the personal side or on the public side.
It really is. I liked hearing Sharad's story about the transition from the unbanked in India to now having cashless payments, smartphones, etc. It's amazing to watch from the outside. Like you mentioned, the leapfrogging. It's now, in many cases, you see people that were behind actually are now leaders, and it's really difficult to map. When I speak to people in emerging markets, and they describe being so many years behind, say, the US, it doesn't really equate, because maybe last year they were so many years behind. Next year they'll be so many years ahead. So it's a really fascinating transformation to witness.
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, Amit, is there anywhere you'd like to direct people? Where can we watch what you're doing, or anything that you'd like to highlight?
I generally try to keep myself active on social media. So I have a Twitter handle and my LinkedIn profile. I also have a blog, although I'm not as regular with the blog itself. So, those destinations are good places to follow what I am doing.
Okay, thank you. I'll include those in the show notes. Well, thank you very much for talking to us today. It's been fascinating, a lot to digest, but I look forward to watching you grow and speaking to you again.
Thanks, David, for this opportunity. It was great interacting with you.